Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're diving into a really fascinating topic, neurodiversity. We'll be looking especially at sensitive individuals and women, mostly through the lens of Jenara Nerenberg's book, Divergent Mind.
Yeah, it's a topic that touches so many, and maybe you've wondered, why some people seem so much more affected by things like noise or crowds or just their own feelings.
Exactly. That's what we want to unpack today.
And this deep dive, it really gives you a chance to understand why you, or maybe people, process things, sensory stuff, social cues, differently than, well, what's often seen as the norm.
We're aiming to pull out the key insights about neurodiversity, about sensitivity.
And Nerenberg's book is great for this. It uses personal stories, interviews, research from psychology, neuroscience.
Even history, looking back at how we got here.
Right. So the mission today is really to get to the heart of it all. Neurodiversity, sensitivity, and how history and society have kind of shaped our ideas of normal versus different.
We're hoping for some of those, aha moments for you, moments that might just shift your perspective a bit. Okay, let's get started.
So one of the first big ideas Nerenberg talks about is this feeling almost right away for sensitive people that they need to sort of hide their true nature, masking.
Like hiding intense curiosity.
Exactly. It becomes this survival mechanism. Learned because society often signals that those traits are different, maybe even abnormal.
Right.
She talks about her own childhood.
Right, feeling this insatiable hunger to know, asking tons of questions, giving these long philosophical monologues.
Which, as she says, wasn't exactly the best way to make friends sometimes.
No. So it led to feeling different, kind of alone, and then consciously changing how she acted.
Yeah, changing mannerisms, gestures, trying to fit that perceived norm. She essentially learned to mask the real her.
And this idea of masking, suppressing that curiosity, those natural reactions, it's a learned strategy, isn't it?
Definitely. A way to navigate a world that doesn't always get it. She talks about stuffing her curiosity, turning to things like reading instead.
Which isn't bad in itself, reading.
No, of course not.
Yeah.
But she was doing it from this place of feeling abnormal without realizing, the huge diversity in how brains are actually wired.
Okay. And while Elaine Aron's work on highly sensitive persons, HSPs, that's been so important.
Hugely important, yeah. Gave it a name and understanding.
Nerenberg wants to push beyond just HSP, right? Broaden the view.
Exactly. She stresses that heightened sensitivity isn't only an HSP thing.
So she brings in other neurotypes.
Right. Autism, ADHD, sensory processing disorder, SPD, and synesthesia too. The key thing is that heightened sensitivity is often like a central piece of these experiences.
Affecting pretty much everything. Work, family.
Education, relationships, even parenting. Yeah.
And she points out how often anxiety and depression show up alongside these traits.
Especially when those underlying sensory differences aren't diagnosed.
Yeah.
Which makes total sense, right?
It does. If you're constantly feeling the world so intensely and you don't know why, that's got to be incredibly stressful.
And the story she shares about late diagnoses, particularly in women, they're really striking.
Like the Columbia grad diagnosed at 28, or the mom in her 40s realizing her own autism and ADHD after her son was diagnosed.
And Nerenberg herself at 32. It just shows how easily these things could be missed or maybe explained away, especially using older models that are often based more on male presentations.
And the reasons people seek these labels later, it's powerful.
It really is. It's about finally having a name and explanation for lifelong experiences, for why you react the way you do.
And maybe starting to understand and heal those feelings of, something's wrong with me.
Yeah. Which brings us right to the core idea, neurodiversity. Nerenberg calls it a game changer.
And it really is. It's this huge shift, moving away from seeing differences as deficits.
And instead seeing them as natural, valuable variations in how human brains work, like biodiversity in nature, basically.
And Nerenberg introduces this really compelling idea, temperament rights.
Yeah, I love that term. The idea that your basic neurological makeup, how your brain works, deserves the same respect as, say, gender or ethnicity.
It's fundamental.
She challenges us to imagine a world where our inner life, thoughts, feelings, senses, gets the same level of respect for its diversity as we give to those, outer categories.
Okay, let's dig into how this sensitivity actually shows up. Because it's not the same for everyone, is it?
Not at all. Nerenberg makes that really clear. It manifests in pretty different ways.
So for an HSP?
It might be mostly about that deep processing of information.
Right.
Really thinking things through.
And for autism?
Often feeling intensely overwhelmed by sensory input, too much noise, light, touch.
Right. And ADHD.
Frequently, there's a heightened emotional sensitivity, feeling emotions very deeply, reacting strongly.
Okay. And sensory processing disorder, SPD.
That can involve really strong, maybe negative reactions to specific things, textures, sounds.
And synesthesia, that's the one where senses get mixed up.
Yeah, like seeing colors with sounds. And some people with synesthesia even report feeling overloaded by other people's emotions, almost like mirror touch. It's fascinating.
Wow. But Nerenberg points out a common thread, right? This idea of melting down.
Exactly. Which can look different: outbursts, migraines, anger. But it's that point where sensory input just becomes too much across these different neurotypes.
And understanding that connection, that it's not just you, can be incredibly validating.
Absolutely. It helps people see there's often a neurological reason for these intense reactions. It's not a character flaw.
Which connects directly to the pressure to conform, doesn't it?
Oh, massively. If you experience the world differently, there's this huge pressure, often unspoken, to just act like you don't.
So people learn to mask, to change their behavior just to get through school or work.
Right. They censor themselves, suppress reactions, try to blend in. It's exhausting.
And Nerenberg is clear about the costs of this constant masking.
Yeah, she really lays it out. More depression, more anxiety, burnout from the sheer effort.
And even financial problems.
Yes. Statistically, neurodivergent people can face more challenges finding and keeping jobs. Higher likelihood of being fired, unfortunately.
But there's that paradox she mentions, too.
Right. That these same individuals can be absolutely brilliant in specific areas that really click with their strengths, often unconventional areas.
While still struggling with the everyday neurotypical expectations, that must create so much internal conflict.
Huge amounts of self-doubt. Why can I do this amazing thing, but not that simple thing?
Which I think resonates with anyone who's ever felt like they just don't quite fit. You question everything about yourself.
And to really get why we label things the way we do now, we need to look back historically.
How we viewed mental and neurological differences over time. Nerenberg mentions things like moral treatment.
Which was actually quite different from later approaches. It emphasized kindness, respect, a balanced environment.
But then the medical model took over.
Right. And that prioritized physical explanations, looking for a biological cause for everything, sometimes overlooking environment or emotions. She references Robert Whitaker's work.
Mad in America.
Yeah, arguing if physicians really pushed to frame madness as purely physical, partly to solidify their own authority.
And it seems the way we define and pathologize behaviors, especially in women, really ramped up with capitalism in Western Europe.
That's a key point Nerenberg makes, drawing on others like Elaine Showalter. Societal and economic forces definitely played a role in shaping what became normal and abnormal.
It wasn't just madness either. Think about homosexuality being called a mental illness.
A really stark example of societal bias becoming medical diagnosis. Gary Greenberg's The Book of Woe talks about how everyday psychopathology just kept expanding.
Creating a market, arguably.
Yeah. So this history is crucial because it makes us ask, how much are our current definitions influenced by history, by culture, by power? Are we still pathologizing natural variations?
Which brings us back to the science of high sensitivity and Elaine Aron's work.
Right. Aron frames high sensitivity sensory processing sensitivity, SPS, not as a disorder, but as a normal neutral trait.
People with high SPS or HSPs, they process information more deeply.
Exactly. They notice more, reflect more, both external stuff and internal feelings. So they can get overstimulated more easily by things others don't even notice: loud music, bright lights, crowds.
And Aron found that trying to just push through and act like non-HSPs can actually be harmful.
Yeah, detrimental to their well-being, which is fascinating.
And there might even be evolutionary advantages, being more aware of the environment.
Aron suggests that possibility, and brain scans show HSPs do process things more elaborately. More activity in areas for sensory integration, awareness, empathy.
Empathy is key there.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And they often have a longer pause to check time. They take a moment to scan for details before acting.
Which means more thoughtful processing, but maybe slower decisions sometimes.
Potentially, yeah, in really fast-paced situations.
Nerenberg includes some items from Aron's questionnaire which really bring it to life, like, are you easily overwhelmed by strong sensory input?
Aware of subtleties? Affected by others' moods? Need to withdraw during busy days?
Sensitive to caffeine? Bothered by bright lights, strong smells, coarse fabrics, sirens?
Have a rich, complex inner life. Made uncomfortable by loud noises. Deeply moved by arts or music.
Get rattled with a lot to do quickly. Make it a high priority to avoid overwhelming situations.
Bothered by itchy tags. Were you called sensitive or shy as a child? Notice delicate scents, tastes, sounds.
Low tolerance for violence on TV. Try hard to avoid mistakes. Find high noise levels uncomfortable.
Tend to eat more under stress, easily startled. Work best when not observed.
Feel frazzled after high stimulation. Find it unpleasant to have a lot going on at once.
Try to avoid surprising situations. Nervous doing things in front of others. Seem aware of subtleties. Find intense sensory input bothersome. It really covers a lot.
Yeah, it paints a very clear picture, and you can see why sensitive women especially might feel shame or guilt if this isn't understood.
Absolutely. Nerenberg argues this lack of validation isn't just bad for individuals, it's bad for society.
Her analogy is powerful society acting like a body missing an arm, unaware of the sensitive limb that could improve everything.
Because sensitivity, she says, is fundamental for strong relationships, healthy economies, societal well-being.
But instead, especially when linked with women, it's been dismissed, neglected.
Even actively unwelcome, particularly in systems like medicine.
Lissa Rankin's story about being shamed for feeling sad after delivering stillborn babies, that's just heartbreaking.
It's shocking. It shows how empathy, emotional processing seen as feminine, were often belittled, rejected in medicine.
Her feelings were completely normal, healthy human responses. Trying to stuff that grief, as she put it, was damaging.
And Nerenberg stresses this isn't just about HSPs. Sensitivity is widespread. The fact we need a special label shows it's not being honored as just part of being human.
Which stops us realizing its benefits.
Exactly. Rankin eventually left mainstream medicine, started the Whole Health Medicine Institute for a more sensitive, holistic approach.
Nerenberg also brings in Angel Kyoto Williams' perspective, a sensitive Black woman navigating Western culture, highlighting the need for diversity in research, too.
These examples really push us. Why is sensitivity pathologized? Is our society set up mainly for the non-sensitive? And what does that mean for everyone?
Nerenberg then lists a whole range of behaviors that might actually be coping mechanisms for dealing with all that overwhelm.
Yeah, it's quite a list. Things like escaping in thought, analyzing existence constantly, finding refuge in fixations or imagination.
Getting lost in thought, imitating others, trouble with lying, not understanding negative behaviors.
Escaping social situations, feeling confused or overwhelmed, unable to relax, extreme relief in solitude.
Feeling isolated, threatened by visitors, obsessing about relationships, dreading events, confusion with social cues.
Deep compassion for suffering, rehearsing conversations, substance sensitivities, difficulty filtering noise.
Questioning purpose, constant inner dialogue, wanting to understand abilities, deep peace at home.
Feeling trapped between self and fitting in, needing downtime, mimicking others without realizing, guilt after special interests.
Rejecting norms, disliking crowds, low self-esteem, sleep sensitivities, not getting jokes.
Adjusting the environment for comfort, remembering small details, longing to be seen and heard.
Relieving anxiety creatively, questioning normality, emotional responses to words numbers, adapting views based on others.
Simple tasks feeling hard, viewing objects as extensions of self, difficulty making keeping friends, overwhelmed by grocery shopping, oversharing, object permanence issues, lack of impulse control in speech, especially younger, black-white thinking, monopolizing conversations. It's incredibly comprehensive.
Wow, it really shows how broadly sensitivity can manifest, and this leads into understanding specific neurodivergences better, starting with autism in women.
Right. Nerenberg explains it's often missed in women because diagnostic criteria can be male-centric, there's overlap with other things, and stereotypes persist.
Which leads to more women self-diagnosing, finding community online.
Exactly. And often, autism is only considered after ruling out other things. Many women don't get that understanding until later in life.
Like Sarah Seeger, the astrophysicist at MIT. She wasn't formally diagnosed, but recognized the traits later.
Yeah, after reading an article and getting confirmation from someone familiar with autism, suddenly everything came together for her.
She talked about feeling odd as a kid, needing rigid schedules, hating disruptions, sensory things like not liking hugs.
And her father, a doctor, didn't see it as autism initially.
But MIT felt like home.
Yes, she felt many colleagues were somewhere on the spectrum. Her directness was often valued there. But the neurotypical world outside, still exhausting.
And understanding herself helped her marriage.
It did. Help both her and her husband understand their different styles and needs better.
This leads nicely into mirror neurons and empathy.
Ah, yes. The discovery of mirror neurons firing both when we do something and when we see someone else do it. Huge implications for understanding empathy, connection. Marco Iacoboni's work is key here.
It shifted neuroscience away from thinking of the brain as separate boxes, right, towards seeing perception, cognition, action as interconnected.
Absolutely. And that interconnected view fits perfectly with the neurodiversity framework focusing on variety, not disease.
Okay, so let's look at sensitivity specifically within autism and ADHD now. Research shows lower sensory thresholds in autism.
Yes, consistently across hearing, vision, taste, touch.
And for ADHD, emotional dysregulation and sensitivity are common, but maybe underestimated.
Definitely underestimated. Nerenberg argues terms like dysregulation can mask that underlying sensitivity.
And ADHD isn't an attention deficit, but difficulty regulating attention, including hyperfocus.
Precisely. And she describes two kinds of sensitivity in ADHD. Intense curiosity about new things, and heightened sensitivity to criticism or rejection.
Often stemming from inconsistent performance due to executive function challenges.
Right. Plus that emotional sensitivity, difficulty with self-compassion.
And adults with ADHD can also have meltdowns from sensory or information overload.
Yes, just like other neurotypes. Stephanie Story's struggling in her postdoc with lack of structure, sensory overwhelm, then realizing it was undiagnosed ADHD really illustrates that.
Her sensitivities, jarring noises, overload in malls sound typical for many women with ADHD.
Very typical.
Yeah.
And that feeling of shame. Nerenberg mentions not meeting basic adult expectations despite being highly accomplished is so common for women with ADHD.
It really highlights the ongoing problem of girls and women being underrepresented in ADHD research.
Which leads to so much misdiagnosis and unnecessary struggle.
Okay, shifting to sensory processing disorder, SPD, Rachel Schneider's perspective is interesting, seeing it as both a difference and a disability.
Yeah, a really nuanced view. It brings gifts like heightened awareness, but also challenges that need managing, good days and bad days.
And her ability to adapt as a new parent because she understood her SPD is quite hopeful.
It shows how crucial awareness and support are.
Nerenberg lists indicators for possible SPD from the Star Institute. Things like oversensitivity, avoiding touch sounds, lethargy, difficulty with tasks.
Inappropriate force, clumsiness, motor task difficulties, needing movement to focus, focus issues generally, misinterpreting questions, reading difficulties.
And there are different patterns within SPD, overresponsivity, underresponsivity.
And the subtypes. Sensory modulation disorder, discrimination disorder, sensory-based motor disorder.
Right. And even though it has a huge impact, there's still debate about including it in the DSM.
Yeah, which is frustrating for many people seeking diagnosis and support.
Let's talk about how SPD affects women's intimate lives. Nerenberg shares Lisa's story late diagnosis after dealing with sensory modulation issues, sensory craving, dyspraxia.
And Lisa's experience of needing to advocate for herself with doctors who didn't understand sensory issues is unfortunately very common for women.
Seeking multiple opinions.
Exactly.
Right.
And big life changes marriage. Becoming a mother can really amplify sensory issues, leading women to realize their own challenges, sometimes after their kids are diagnosed.
Occupational therapy seems key here. What are the goals?
Mainly function, joy, and calm, helping women understand their stimulation levels and find ways to regulate.
Using tools like listening systems, weighted blankets, sensory brushes.
Yeah, things to soothe and regulate the nervous system. OTs help identify triggers and soothers.
And sensory overload can look like anxiety or panic attacks, right? Leading to misdiagnosis.
Very easily. Therese Bay Benson points out that adults often just avoid situations that trigger them, masking the sensory root cause. It gets mistaken for psychological issues.
And while more women might seek help, men might self-medicate or withdraw.
That seems to be a trend. And there's a strong linking, Nerenberg highlights, between sensory defensiveness and anxiety. Constant sensory bombardment is traumatizing.
Often leading to depression, too.
Yeah, they often go hand in hand.
We should also touch on sound sensitivity specifically and misophonia, Catherine Renee Thomas's experience.
Right, starting with annoyance at chewing sounds, then expanding to other sounds, even visual triggers like repetitive movements.
And it's important to stress, even if sometimes described humorously, misophonia is a serious neurological trait with real impacts.
Absolutely debilitating for some people.
Looking towards integration and self-advocacy, Rachel Schneider's story comes up again, using her SPD understanding in motherhood and her career as a diversity expert.
Her journey really shows the power of self-awareness and advocating for your needs.
And a crucial part of that self-awareness is interoception, right? Understanding internal body signals.
Yes, perceiving heartbeat, breathing, hunger. Difficulty with this, seen in some autistic people, can really impact well-being and regulation.
Nerenberg mentions research linking poor heartbeat perception to anxiety and her own visualization technique for the amygdala.
It points toward understanding symptoms based on brain function, not just DSM categories, a big paradigm shift.
Moving away from diagnostic labels that aren't always rooted in neuroscience.
Exactly. It could reduce stigma, seeing differences as brain variations, not disorders.
But there's that tension. You still often need the label for insurance for services.
It's a tricky balance.
And in therapy, a neurodiversity focus means validating sensitivity, moving away from hierarchy.
Towards a more humanistic approach. The person is the expert on their experience. Focus on treating distress, not pathologizing difference.
Which can be tough within the current medical system.
Definitely a challenge.
We also need to talk about sound, its impact, especially on neurodivergent people.
It's profound. Research shows even extreme low and high frequencies can trigger fight or flight.
Nerenberg connects auditory sensitivity, neurodiversity, OT, and trauma, suggesting maybe trauma for some is just living in a world that's too loud.
It's a powerful idea. It calls for society, routines, environments to be more compatible with diverse sensory needs.
Thinking about supportive environments, home is more than just the building, isn't it? It's environment and relationships.
And sensitive neurodivergent people experience both differently. Nerenberg uses the term umwelt, the subjective sensory world, which differs for everyone, especially neurodivergent folks.
Challenging assumptions about what's calming, like nature might be better than sterile environments.
Some research suggests that, yeah. She also knows how biases, like colonialist ideas favoring restraint, have shaped our spaces.
The Cooper Hewitt sensory design exhibit shows growing awareness, though.
Definitely. More focus on embodied perception, the physical aspects of design.
Nerenberg talks about feeling oneness with a space, feeling truly at home, maybe more common for sensitive people or synesthetes.
It's an interesting thought. She encourages you, the listener, to experiment, find your own sweet spot of stimulation.
Because accommodating sensory differences at home can help people flourish.
Absolutely.
And what about intimacy in relationships? Denise and Tim's story.
A great example of a compatible neurodivergent relationship built on understanding shared sensitivities.
Showing there's no single typical neurodivergent dynamic. Isabel and Dan's story also shows adapting to different traits.
Yeah, Dan being routine-oriented, Isabel having ADHD autism, and being less time-focused. They made it work.
The key seems to be checking in, communication, mutual respect.
Always, which leads to neurodiversity-focused couples counseling. Eva Mendez's work.
Emphasizing autism as a difference, not a disorder, and everyone being unique.
Right. Therapy involves framing the autistic perspective, helping both partners understand. She sees relationships improve once neurodivergence is acknowledged.
And again, that shift to a humanistic approach, seeing the individual as the expert, listening, validating.
Crucial. She also notes the co-occurrence of autism and trauma, and sometimes involving family or other professionals is important.
Nerenberg suggests these experiences in homes and relationships offer lessons for society.
Better design, sensitive aesthetics, accepting difference, non-pathologizing therapy.
She hopes the sensory world of neurodivergent people might become more the norm, potentially healing a fractured world.
It's a hopeful vision.
Now let's shift to the world of work. Neurodivergent people often face challenges in traditional workplaces, right?
Big challenges. Differences in thinking, processing, responding to stimuli, leading to overwhelm, boredom, maybe overexcitement that's misunderstood.
Nerenberg shares her own tough experiences, being fired, feeling lost.
Which highlights how vital self-awareness is. Understanding your own mind lets you design your work life, communicate needs.
And the neurodiversity movement is advocating for workplace change.
Yes, pushing for understanding, policies, respect, especially for women and people of color within that group.
That idea of temperament rights at work, acknowledging neurodivergence, open communication.
Musnique's positive experience at Adobe shows it's possible, but the stigma around things like ADHD is still very real.
Nerenberg's description of a job interview from a neurodivergent perspective, the gap between internal processing and external presentation is so illuminating.
It really is.
But there are positive shifts happening. Companies like SAP, Microsoft.
Inclusive hiring programs, yeah. And a bigger focus on mental health, like at Accenture. Open conversations led by leaders really help reduce stigma.
Sarah Kerchak's point about the film industry being surprisingly compatible is interesting, too.
Because the social motivations are often very overt, apparently.
And sensitivity itself can be a leadership strength. Susan Cain's work.
Absolutely. Many execs navigate high sensitivity. It can be a superpower for understanding and connecting with teams. Open offices, though, are often tough.
Neurodivergent perspectives are also driving innovation. AI, VR, sensory design.
Definitely. Nerenberg mentions replica AI as empathetic tech developed with neurodivergent needs in mind.
And sensory-friendly accommodations are becoming more mainstream. Arenas, airports, libraries, Walmart.
It's a promising trend. Plus, work like preserving natural soundscapes in national parks.
Nerenberg introduces neuroqueering, altering human performance, like echolocation in blind individuals.
Laura Thaler's research, yeah. Nerenberg suggests that sensitive neurodivergent people might also develop unique ways of operating if supported.
Things like quiet hours in supermarkets challenge norms. UK research taking broader views on hearing voices.
Suggesting a spectrum, not just abnormality. Moving towards integration, not separation.
From an evolutionary view, these traits might have been advantageous in other times.
It's possible. Imagine the innovations if sensitive people were fully empowered. Could these sensibilities help solve big problems, create better environments?
Could alternative communication emerge, like echolocation?
Fascinating questions.
Integrating neurodiversity into existing systems, like medicine in Mexico, as Garcia discusses, is hard. It needs openness from professionals.
Requires constantly updating our ideas of human nature. But the talents are valuable. Empathy, intensity, attention to detail. Society needs those.
It's about balance, right? Using supports, but also valuing identity.
Exactly. Personal choice matters too. Ellen Sachs's experience with schizophrenia.
Using medication and therapy, but respecting neurodiversity and mad pride. Workplace acceptance was key for her.
And her work on finding a new word for schizophrenia shows the power of language, reframing. Neurodivergent people need diverse support systems.
Labels themselves are fluid, evolving. Some people move beyond them, others need them for access.
Nerenberg found embracing labels helpful initially, then less needed as understanding grew.
Ultimately, she says, we're all human. Respond with kindness, help, regardless of labels.
That's the core message.
Nerenberg sums up her own journey with 4 key things: finding the right career, understanding needs, communicating needs, and learning about her body.
She found reading research on the brain and body felt like reading poetry or philosophy.
Discovering interoception therapy, research on heartbeat perception, and anxiety and autism, these were significant for her.
She encourages exploring resources on the brain-body connection, considering OT, sensory design, and the healing power of meaningful work.
And she mentions the Neurodiversity Project, connecting ideas, aiming for systemic change.
There's also a call for overhauling the medical system, addressing gender bias, referencing books like Doing Harm and Inferior.
Highlighting work by women in medicine, pushing for more holistic, empathetic approaches.
And with rising loneliness, doctors are often expected to address social needs. Open communication about our inner lives is crucial for change.
Finally, she recommends films as a way to reframe narratives about divergent identity and mental health.
Yeah, stories can be incredibly powerful for building understanding.
So wrapping up this deep dive, some key takeaways really stand out. Neurodiversity as a natural spectrum is fundamental.
Sensitivity is deeply interconnected with so much more than we usually think. History and society have shaped our views of normal.
And the potential for a more inclusive, supportive world that honors all neurological experiences is huge.
We really hope you'll reflect on this. How might these ideas apply to you, to people you know?
And maybe a final thought to leave you with. What if those traits we call sensitivities were actually recognized as assets, as the foundation for a more empathetic, innovative future?
How different could our world be if it was designed with neurodiversity truly in mind?
If you want to explore more, check out the Neurodiversity Project or Dr. Elaine Aron's work on high sensitivity. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.